Italy didn't always speak Italian, there wasn't always just one variety of Greek, and Turkey used to speak a very different form of Turkish. These are all examples of standardized languages, dialects specifically chosen, molded, or even created to be the lingua franca of a linguistically diverse country. So what I want to know is, in a country with so many diverse dialects, how do you pick one to be the standard language of the entire nation? And furthermore, how do you standardize it? This video is brought to you by LingoPie. Probably the best example of this kind of story is the question, why does Italy speak Italian? Which sounds like the dumbest question ever, but bear with me here. The usual story regarding the evolution of the Romance languages goes something like this. The Romans spoke Latin, then conquered the known world and made everyone under their rule also speak Latin, but then their empire fell, leaving all the regional varieties to split off into different dialects and eventually evolve into Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian. That story, however, well, I mean it's completely true, but it leaves out a lot of the details. This is a map of the dialects spoken across Italy, still to this day. As the history fandom knows, Italy spent well over 1,000 years divided among different kingdoms, city-states, weird trade republics, and external empires. So this division isn't particularly shocking. In fact, I made a whole video about this earlier this year, in which I also talked about this story, but that video was about history and geography, so I didn't really focus on the language side as much. Some of the most widely spoken dialects, even to this day, are Sicilian, Sardinian, and Venetian, but they're not alone. These dialects, however, aren't dialects of Italian, or at least not the Italian we know to this day, but rather a family of closely related dialects that all descended directly from Vulgar Latin. This, therefore, posed quite a bit of a problem in the late 19th century, when the disparate kingdoms and trade republics were reunited into the Kingdom of Italy, an Italian nation in need of a common Italian language. The roots of what is now the Italian language arguably date back to the 14th century, with the works of Dante Alighieri. Dante was from Florence, and thus spoke the Tuscan dialect. However, many of his writings also incorporated words and phrases from various southern dialects. The popularity of the Divine Comedy, in addition to the Tuscan dialect's more middle-of-the-road characteristics between North and South, led to this particular dialect gaining traction among the educated elites of Italian societies, which 400 years later gave the newly unified Italian nation a clear choice for the common dialect. However, one problem still remained: getting the poors on board with the idea. Upon unification, only 3% of the Italian population spoke Dante's Italian, and after World War II, this had only increased to 20%. The new Italian constitution in 1948 enshrined the right to education, but what really cemented the dominance of the Italian language in the 20th century was the advent of commercial television. Over the centuries, this dialect also absorbed words and phrases from the various dialects. These loanwords include everything from regionally specific things, like panettone from Milan, to even the greeting ciao from Venetian, likely derived from the word schiavo for slave, as in, your humble servant, Francesco. Thus, the story of Italian shows one way to linguistically unite a country split among hundreds of dialects: just pick the most fashionable dialect. Similar things also happened in France with the dominance of the northerly langues d'oïl, in Spain with Castilian, and most particularly half a world away in Indonesia with the modern Bahasa Indonesia, derived from Real Malay due to its widespread use among traders from the Malacca Sultanate, and actually more commonly spoken by its citizens as a second language. But finding a common tongue for a linguistically diverse country isn't the only reason for human players to mod the game's language files. Now, if you want to learn Italian, or any language really, the best way in my opinion is to, of course, go somewhere that speaks your target language. Total immersion. But that's generally expensive and takes a lot of time, and it's generally not always available. The second best way, however, is to consume media in the language, something for which LingoPie is here to help. LingoPie is an extension that allows you to not just watch shows and movies in another language, but really truly understand what's being said in the subtitles. How it works is simple. Simply create an account with LingoPie and download their extension, and from there you can binge select shows on Netflix, Disney+, or the dozens of other channels they have partnered with to your language learning lovers' heart's content. You do still need an account with Netflix or Disney+ to access their catalogs, just to be clear. It's actually really cool because normally watching movies in a foreign language means that you might miss a lot of important words and expressions. But with LingoPie, you can highlight words you don't know and instantly get a clear and meaningful translation without having to awkwardly keep Google Translate open at all times. It even lets you come back to that word later as a flashcard. Lingopie is offering you a week-long free trial via the link in the description to help augment your language learning experience. Speaking of Malacca, in Greece there is only one Greek language, spoken throughout the entire country, give or take a couple isolated dialects spoken by a few thousand people each. In ancient Greece, however, the Hellenic family was a bit more numerous, as several closely related dialects populated the shores of the Aegean. These included everything from the Attic-Ionic group associated with Athens and the Ionian city-states, to the Doric group spoken by Sparta, to the Aeolic group spoken in Thebes and Lesbos, to the geographically split Arcado-Cypriot group. But upon the conquest of Alexander the Great's father, Philip II, with most of Greece under his rule, it was the prestigious Attic dialect that became the official language of the Macedonian courts. When Alexander later conquered the Persian Empire in a way that people thought was pretty S-tier, Attic Greek would quickly morph into a new dialect known as Kine, literally meaning common, which eventually became the lingua franca of the Greek empires during the Hellenistic Age. Wait, why is there still a lot of time before the Turkish chapter? I already did the ad. As the flags ruling over the Eastern Mediterranean changed, Kine Greek slowly evolved into Medieval Greek, which itself began to re-diverge into several dialects under Ottoman rule, with Greek speakers in Crete, Cyprus, and the Pontus region often unable to understand the dialect that had evolved in mainland Greece, what we simply know as Modern Greek. Within Greece itself, communication wasn't really an issue. However, many of the architects of the modern Greek nation came to the agreement that ancient Greece was really freaking cool. Thus, when the Hellenic Republic was recognized as an independent nation, the nation instead adopted a dialect called Katsarevosa, a sort of combination of the modern Demotic and the dialects of antiquity. The new nation used this purified form for official affairs, and within its borders the program was largely a success. However, Greece itself at the time only held 800,000 Greek speakers, with 2 million more outside their borders, mainly in the Ionian Isles, which were under British control at the time, and in the regions still under the Ottoman Empire. Moreover, while the dialect was successfully put into use in government, the average Ioannis still would have used Demotic in their day-to-day life. Even more so, however, the prohibition of Demotic in government settings resulted in a long-standing dispute known as the Greek language question, with left-wing movements advocating for the use of Demotic and right-wing movements championing Katsarevosa. Demotic eventually became the official language of Greece in 1975, after the military dictatorship ended, but during that century and a half had absorbed many different words and grammar rules from Katsarevosa, forming what is today known as Standard Modern Greek. Finally, not to play favorite side of the Aegean, a similar question arose barely a century later in the remains of the Ottoman Empire itself, as perhaps the most dramatic example of a country's language completely changing overnight would be that of Turkey in the 1920s and 30s. Okay, metaphorically overnight. Throughout the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire experienced a dramatic decline in its power and influence, former vilayets declaring independence here, some colonial shenanigans over there, and overall seemingly falling behind its industrialized counterparts in Western Europe. After World War I proved the final nail in the coffin for the sick man of Europe, this guy named Mustafa Kemal, or Ataturk, viewed the old empire as a relic of the past, and after assuming power, began a massive series of reforms to modernize the country and move its image closer to the nations of Europe. The imperial government became a democratic republic, the country was made to be completely secular, and certain traditional forms of clothing were even banned. But there was one change of particular interest to us right now: the language. While Turkish today uses a modified form of the Latin alphabet, Ottoman Turkish used a heavily modified version of the Perso-Arabic script, which is of course a heavily modified version of the original Arabic script. So you have this interesting situation where a script made for an Afro-Asiatic Semitic language was modified for use in an Indo-European Iranian language, and then once more for an Oghuz Turkic language. For the non-language nerds among you, what this basically meant was that it was crazy complicated and didn't always make sense. While Turkish was of course the main official language of the empire, Arabic was still important for religious purposes, while Farsi was an important language in government and literature, which naturally led to their Turkish absorbing loanwords from the two languages. The Ottoman Empire wasn't exactly a monolingual state either, as the empire rarely, if ever, imposed the Turkish language on conquered areas. In fact, this Ottoman Turkish dialect would have been hard to understand not just to your average Serb or Egyptian, but to the average Turk. as most of the common Turkish folk would have spoken Kaba Türkçe, or Vulgar Turkish, a very different variety from the convoluted vernacular used in the imperial courts. Thus, it was not just about forging a new image for the Turkish nation, it was also about efficiency. These reforms weren't passed immediately, but began in 1928 when the alphabet reform took place, replacing the modified Arabic script with a modified Latin script. The Language Council established 2 years earlier looked at this and thought, okay, if we can get schools to teach Latin and Arabic for the first few years before shifting to purely Latin, we can maybe switch the whole country over in 5 to 15 years. To which Ataturk responded, either in 3 months or not at all, which quite understandably made everyone shift their plans. Thus, schools, newspapers, and state institutions were given a strict deadline to switch over to the Latin script, which, accompanied by the compulsory education, saw literacy rates go from around 15% to near zero to around 96% today. I have to say, I really like this political cartoon of a guy made from Latin letters kicking out another guy made out of Arabic letters. As an appreciator of both scripts, I just think that's really clever. Then, in 1932, came the language reform itself, doing something actually kinda similar to what Katharevousa did with ancient Greek dialects, bringing back old native words that had been replaced by loanwords, and coining new words for brand new concepts that had arisen over the previous centuries, or neologisms. Thus, loanwords like mushkil, vilayat, and harb were replaced with güçlük, il, and savaş. In fact, you can compare the latter two to Azerbaijani, a similar language in a country that didn't go through these same reforms. This didn't come easy, however, as some estimate that around 60% of the Turkish vocabulary at the time were Persian or Arabic loanwords. And if you've ever studied Turkish, you'll know that there are still plenty in there. Basically, imagine if someone completely rebuilt British society and replaced all the Greek, French, or Latin loanwords with older Germanic terms, and also made it so English will be written in a completely different script. Okay, just imagine English, but written phonetically in Devanagari. The thing about these languages, though, is that they are not conlangs, or constructed languages, like Klingon or Elvish or Na'vi. They are naturally evolved languages, but with a few pieces clipped off or grafted on, and mandated to be the official language of an entire nation. Because when you actually look at different dialects, you realize it's not so simple as, these people are Italians who speak Italian, these people are French people who speak French. But there's a lot of blurring that goes on between borders. Now, as I said at the end of the Italian section, these are just 3 of dozens of examples of language standardization, which makes sense when you think about it. As the saying goes, a language is just a dialect with an army and a navy. But do you know of any similar stories in other languages? If so, let us know in the comments. After all, an educational video is one thing, but let's also make this an educational comment section. Don't forget to check out LingoPie, and I'll see you next time.